Hi, this is Adam Martin. Today I'm going to show you how to use a couple storytelling tools developed by KnightLab out of Northwestern University. KnightLab has created a couple great storytelling tools often used by journalists. They describe them as easy-to-use tools that can help you tell better stories. They have quite a few of these tools. Juxtapose is a nice one that lets you compare side-by-side photos with a nice slider, sort of slide back and forth over the two. Great for before and after images, for instance, of like a hurricane or a tsunami or a fire. Easy to Scene, which makes easy to make VR stories. SoundSight, which allows you to embed seamless inline audio in stories, like you see here. Storyline, which allows you to tell stories behind numbers like in line charts. And the two we're actually going to talk about today are StoryMap and TImelineJS, both of which are really nice storytelling devices and just incredibly easy to use. In fact, you could easily teach these to yourself just by following along with the instructions or watching the short videos on KnightLab's TImelineJS webpage. So first we're going to look at TImelineJS, which is located at timeline.knightlab.com. And this is what like a timeline basically looks like. This is one about women in computing. And lets you just slide between different slides. And each slide can contain like a date, a headline, text, and then some sort of visual element like a photo or a Google map or an embedded video, etc. You can also embed full screen photos or change the color of the background of the slides, etc. So they have some tips and tricks here. There's also a nice short video showing how to make timelines, and it really walks you through step by step how to do this. Basically, you create one of these timelines just by filling out a Google spreadsheet, which I'm going to show you how to do right now. For today's example, we're going to create a timeline of key moments in the 2020 pandemic in the United States. And as a source for this timeline, I actually got all of the data and most of the photos we're going to use from this great New York Times story called A Timeline of the Coronavirus Pandemic. And I'm going to use data from this great timeline that the New York Times put together for both our timeline and our story map. Of course, if I was publishing a timeline or a story map, I wouldn't just grab photos and text from the New York Times. I would do my own reporting and collect my own elements. But this is just a great sort of timeline that was already created and that was there that I could sort of grab the data from for these demonstration purposes. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I've laid out my slides sort of in just in sort of list form here, so it's easy for me to grab all the elements that I need as I go along. So the first step, as is described right here on the TImelineJS webpage, is we want to grab the spreadsheet template from TImelineJS. And we do that just by clicking that button, and then we say, yes, we'd like to make a copy. And so here we can see the spreadsheet, and basically each row in the spreadsheet is a single slide. And it's really easy to figure out, what to insert where. We have our time. You can have a date. You can also have an end date, so it would say between, this time and this time. You can also have a display date if you want to override any of these other dates. Headline, text. You have a media element, which could be a photo or a video. Have a media credit or media caption. Also a media thumbnail if you need. Different types of slides. We're just going to stick with the sort of default, the first slide is going to be the title, and the rest of them are just going to be normal. And then we can actually add background colors or full screen images as background. So this is all we really need to do is just copy this and then start filling it out. The next step, and we'll go ahead and move on before sort of publish this before we start filling it out, just so I can show you how it works, is we go under File and we select Publish to the Web. Say File, Publish to the Web. And this tells us that we want to select OD1 and make sure it says Web Page, and then click Publish. OD1, Web Page, Publish. Yep, and we want to go ahead and publish that. And that goes ahead and publishes our spreadsheet and gets it ready for us to view. And so now it says what we need to do is copy the URL at the top of our spreadsheet, which we'll go ahead and do. I'll copy that. Then I'll go ahead and paste it here, which will actually generate our timeline. And we can set width and height options. I generally just leave those at the default, though sometimes you might want to increase the height if you have big text blocks, which are not really recommended. So now we get an embed to share our we have share link to share our timeline, which we could pull up in the browser, or an embed, which we could put inside an HTML page, or in like WordPress or another CMS. And we can go ahead and preview that here just by clicking the preview button, and this will ensure that our spreadsheet is working. We can see here it's just pulling in the default data that was in our spreadsheet, right? So it came with these sort of 3 slides already embedded in it. Just a couple examples. And that's really it. And so what we can do now is we can go ahead and pop open this share link to, if we want. Actually, we could just click preview in a new window. And this will allow us to actually see how things are progressing as we work. So the only thing left to do now is really to start filling out our spreadsheet and populating it with our own data. So we're going to choose the first slide just as like a title slide, and that's going to be row number 2 here. And so for my title, I just wanted to say key moments in the 2020 pandemic in the United States. And that's what I want to be my headline. And I'm going to give it a little bit of text that's basically just like the source. I want to give credit to the New York Times. Since I have borrowed everything from them, I want to make sure that it's fully credited. And I also want to, slide this over here. I also want to use a photo here. So I'll go over to Media and just insert this photo link. And so you can't use local photos. You'll have to use photos that already are hosted somewhere on the web. And we'll put in our media credit here, which is credit New York Times. And I can just delete anything else that's in this row that I don't need. Okay, not much else there. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and save. I'll just say File. Oh, there's not actually a save button. So, okay, so we'll just go ahead and go over here and we'll refresh. And we'll see that it's already gone ahead and updated with the information that we put in our spreadsheet. So that's one of the great things about Timeline is that you can continue updating it and it will update live in your embed on your web page. So it's really easy to use. So let's go ahead and fill out some more rows here in our timeline. Okay, so next I have a slide. I basically have 8 or 10 slides here that follow the format of just describing key moments in the 2020 pandemic in the United States. So the first one's going to be the U.S. reports a confirmed case of COVID-19. So I'll go over to my second slide here, and that's going to be my headline. And I've got a date of January 21st. That's going to be January 21st, 2020. And so I'll just say 1/21/2020. I don't need these end dates. For my text, I'm going to say, use this text. First confirmed case in the United States came in Washington State, where a man in his early 30s developed symptoms after returning from a trip to Wuhan. Let's go ahead and paste that there. And I've got a photo that I want to use. That I'll just post in the media box there. And then for my credit, it's also going to be the New York Times. I'm just going to copy and paste that. I'm not going to have any media captions here. And this has a background color of gray, which I'm not really going to use for this slide, so I'll just delete that, and it'll go ahead and be the default color of white. So let's just go ahead and see how that displays. So there's our title slide. Now here we have our first slide that's populated very nicely. Oh, this seems to have a time. Let's see if we can find that. 20, oh, time, okay. So I screwed that up a little bit. So 2020, the year 2020 goes here, and we'll just leave the time blank. see if that fixes that. Oops. Oops. Okay, it didn't. Something's going wrong here. Let's figure it out. Oh, okay. For some reason it has that as our third now, which is fine. Oh, because it's putting it in order. Okay, that makes sense. Because it's a timeline. So it's actually, even though this is the order of our rows, it's looking and seeing that we have this slide from 2011, so it's ordering that one first, which won't be a problem because we're actually going to go ahead and replace that one now. Okay, so let's add in a couple more slides. Next, we'll look at President Trump declares a national emergency on March 13th. So again, 2020. So just delete the cells that I don't need. I've got a little bit of text here that I want to include. Put in my photo. And again, it's from the New York Times. And go ahead and delete everything else that I don't need from there. Okay. Great, so now we've got our third slide. I just like to keep checking to make sure everything is working correctly as I go along. Yep, looks great. Okay, let's go ahead and add our next slide. The date for this one, CDC recommended no gatherings of 50 or more people. It's March 15th. Have a little bit of text there. Okay, have my image. And again, the credit is the New York Times. So I'd like to go ahead and demonstrate just one more, and then we can see sort of what the final might look like. Have the United States leads the world in confirmed cases on March 26th. And the reason I wanted to show this one was because we're actually going to add a video embed. And for that, I'm just pulling out the YouTube URL for the YouTube embed. And I'll just paste that in the media column. And for this credit, it's actually Al here, English. We'll put that here. So let's go ahead and check out our slideshow to this point. So you can see that very quickly we put together a nice slideshow, lots of information. And we have our video here that will actually play right within the slide.
Cases.
So I won't bore you guys by making you watch me populate the rest of this spreadsheet, but I have about 8 slides here that I think if I populated it, 8 to 10 slides, that would give a nice overview of sort of the major moments of the 2020 pandemic, key moments in the 2020 pandemic in the United States. We can go ahead and click here and see what the timeline really looks like in the end if I had finished my spreadsheet. And really the biggest work for this is not filling out the spreadsheet or any of the technology, doing anything on timeline. Here I ended it with this slide that has a black background just to make things look a little stark. The main work is really in the reporting and in the gathering of information. So timeline can be a really useful tool. Certainly you see a lot of newsrooms and professional publications use it. As you can see up here in the examples, we used it quite a bit when I worked at the Baltimore Sun, and we use it quite a bit at CNS. And it's really easy to use, and the website at timeline.knightlab.com will really walk you completely through the process. Okay, so the next tool that I wanted to show you guys is called StoryMapJS, and it is fairly similar, but it's actually easier to use. So for StoryMap, I've got some data also pulled from that New York Times story, where we're going to look at the making of a pandemic, the early spread of COVID-19 across the world. So instead of focusing on the US, in this story map, we're actually going to focus on COVID spreading around the world sort of in the early days in January and February of 2020. So we'll go ahead and open up StoryMap, and you will need to have a Google account to do this. So really you'll have to have a Google account to do Timeline also, because you'll need to use Google Sheets. And what I'm going to do first is just click Make a Story Map. And you can see I've made lots of story maps for, I've even made this story map before for different tutorials and examples. But we're going to go ahead and start from scratch, so I'll click New, saying what do you want to call it? So we're going to call it COVID-19 story map example. And I'll go ahead and click Create. And so story map is similar to Timeline, but instead of having slides that progress via time series, this is going to plot our story geographically in different places around the world, depending on where, what geographic location we assign each of our slides. So we're going to start, with the first slide is always just, doesn't have a location assigned to it. So we're just going to call it The Making of a Pandemic, the Early Spread of COVID-19 Across the World. And I'm going to, again, source the New York Times here. I believe I have a photo that I want to use. Oh, and then with StoryMap, you can actually use local photos. We don't have to use photos that are hosted somewhere on the web. So I can actually upload a photo. I just need to go and find where I have my photos. Okay, so we're calling this one, I believe this is Story Map Photo 0. Yep. I'll go ahead and open that and upload it. Give it a credit of the New York Times. Okay, so that's our first sort of slide here, and I'll just hit save and we go to preview. And you'll see once we actually have some locations, it'll actually show a map here on this front page too. Okay, so we click this button to add a slide, and we will add our first slide. So the first slide that we want to add is China reported its first death. And I've got a little bit of text I want to add here. And the location I want to use is Wuhan, China. And so I'll go up here and I'll search for a location, and it'll try to guess where I'm looking. And we'll go ahead and choose right here. That's Wuhan. And now we'll upload our image. For this one, it's Story Map Photo 1. And again, the credit is the New York Times. Okay, and that's our first slide, and I can save, and now I can go back and preview. You can see it sort of plotted this on a map. And this map will improve and grow sort of as we add more slides. Okay, so let's add some more. So next, other countries included the United States, add confirmed cases. Okay, so the location that we want to use here is Washington State in the United States. I just want to be careful to make sure it's not showing us Washington, D.C., and it's not. Okay. All right, add our photo. Edit New York Times. We'll go ahead and save it, and we'll preview this. Actually, why don't we go back to the beginning? And we can see now it's adding a map here on the front page, and it will actually move across the globe as we sort of navigate through our different slides. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and add one more. I want to make this location in the Philippines. You can be very specific and say Manila in the Philippines, or you can be generic and just say the Philippines, and it'll find a location to put it for you either way, which is nice. Now if we preview, go ahead and start at the beginning. All right, we can see all of our slides sort of moving across the globe as we work together. Okay, I'm going to save this, and we'll go ahead and go back to my maps, and we'll take a look at, here's the full version of this story map. So again, I won't make you guys sort of watch me input all of this data, but we can preview and sort of see how I've created this nice 8 or 10 slide story map that sort of tells a story about the early spread of COVID across the globe. And this is, this makes a lot of sense to use story map for because it's based on geography, and we can really see it sort of moving across the world. And once we're finished, we can click this share button, and it's going to give us a couple ways to share it, right? We can use this link, which we could just grab the link, and we can paste that right into our browser. It's just going to show us our story map here, which we could use as sort of a standalone page if we wanted to. But probably more likely, we're going to want to use this embed code, which we can embed into an HTML page or to a CMS like WordPress, which is generally what you're going to end up doing, right? To embed a story map like this inside of a larger story. So I've created an exercise that you may want to work on to practice using TImelineJS, or you could probably also use this to practice StoryMap.js. So if you go to the URL that you see on your screen, you'll have access to the exercise, and I've included everything that you'll need, photos, text, headlines, and credits to create your own TImelineJS. So you can use this as an opportunity to practice using Timeline to make sure that you understand how to do everything. So that's it for the video about how to use TImelineJS and StoryMap.js. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have fun using these great tools to help tell your stories.